Imagine it's a beautiful morning in Miami. Sunshine, 64 degrees. There's an FBI unit sitting across from a bank on South Dixie Highway. Agents Jake Hanlon and Ed Mireles are drinking coffee and shooting the breeze. Nothing different from hundreds of other stakeouts. Until they hear, "Attention all units." It's 9:31 a.m. on April 11th, 1986. That's one of the most important dates for the militarization of police. Within 5 minutes, law enforcement was forever changed. So what happened on that historic day? That's the story you'll hear. It's time to start telling our own stories. I'm Steve Kellums, and welcome to Blue Canary. On April 11th, 1986, FBI agents Mireles and Hanlon were on stakeout in Miami for two bank robbers, Michael Platt and William Maddox. Now, what was it about these two criminals that made this impact our history so much? I'll tell you one thing. After a single felony stop, based on strong police work, a gunfight broke out that lasted for almost 5 minutes. And when the shooting stopped, 2 FBI agents were dead, the 2 suspects were dead, and 5 others were wounded. So what happened? Ed Mireles won the FBI's Medal of Valor for his actions during the gunfight, and he's on the show today to tell us the story that starts 8 months earlier.
We had a series of bank robbery and armored truck robberies happening in Miami starting around August 1985 up until the end of the case in April 1986. And what happened in August, we more or less had a handle on what was going on as far as the robbers. You know what's going on in your backyard. So when the robbery in August happened, we knew it was unusual because you had 2 male suspects, totally camouflaged, dark hoods, dark gloves, dark clothing, military-style weapons. They accost an armored truck driver at a restaurant, and they didn't get away with much money because they hit the guard at a restaurant. Restaurants don't usually deal in that much cash. They got away with about $2,500. But the unusual thing about it was when the armored truck driver was trying to get away from the scene, they opened up with an assault rifle with .223 caliber shell casings that we found. They fired 15 shots at the rear of the armored truck, and you're thinking, what would possess somebody to do that other than just letting out his frustration? In fact, they call them armored trucks for a reason. So you're firing a light caliber assault rifle round at it. It was just a total waste of time. But on top of that, when they jumped in their getaway car, for some reason, I guess gave us a big clue about their background. They decided, or they had some excess ordnance. They threw out 2 smoke grenades, 2 military-grade, regular old white smoke grenades, popped them out of the side of the car in the driveway and down the street to cover their escape. What in the world are we dealing with?
That story Ed shares is the beginning of the case leading up to the events on April 11th. Now notice how violent these 2 criminals were. They're using military-grade weapons for a crime that many bad guys only use a note, and they weren't afraid to use them. And as it turns out, while they were amateur robbers, they were militarily trained. William Maddox was a former Marine and a U.S. Army military policeman, and Michael Platt served as a U.S. Army Ranger. They had experience, training, and a military mindset. As robberies progressed around the area, the FBI continued to work with the Miami police in trying to identify these criminals.
And then popping smoke, you'd think they were vectoring in a helicopter or something. So we knew that was odd. Because we had no modus operandi in Miami with anything even close to that. So we knew we had some new players. But we had a total of 5 robberies, and the arrest on April 11th would have been the 6th event that we could confirm through physical evidence that they were involved with. As a sidebar, we had 10 other events that we suspected that these guys were involved in, but we couldn't link them forensically to the cases. So in my mind, there were actually, on the day of the arrest, there were actually 15 events that these guys were good for. But forensically and legally speaking, I guess we can only prove 5. These guys have been pretty active over the course of those 8 months. So historically, Gordon McNeil and the case agent had figured out that 50% of the time the robberies occurred on Fridays, and they usually hit 100% of the time between 9 and 12, 9 and 1 p.m.
Leading up to April 11th, Ed shares how they knew to be on the stakeout that led to that historic outcome.
So what happened was there was a robbery at Barnett Bank. And when they hit that bank, they only got approximately $2,500 from the robbery. So Gordon knew. I mean, he did the analysis. He said, okay, they only got $2,500 or something like that. So he figured the last time these guys hit, they only got about $8,000. Okay, so he said, tomorrow's Friday. It's been 3 weeks since they hit. How about we set up a surveillance? So he said, bottom line, he said, I think they're due. And that's how the surveillance started. We had a witness whose car was stolen and survived. One of the few people to actually be confronted by the two robbers, Platt and Maddox, that survived. So it was very lucky for us that we had a living witness who provided a Metro-Dade County with one of those sketch artists, provided a composite of what these guys look like. So we had those copies, and we had all the previous robberies in the Southwest area. Okay, that's another thing that I forgot to tell you. The MO, the modus operandi, they always hit in the southwest part of Miami. So we figured they lived in the area. They knew the area very well because they were like smoke. They were like ghosts. They disappeared into the neighborhoods. So they had to know where they were going. So they always hit in southwest. They always hit between 9 and noon. And 50% of the time they hit on Fridays, and April 11th was a Friday. So we were out there looking, and the idea was, hey, we'll be close by in case anything happens at a location that we're not watching or happen to be close to. We'll be in a position to respond a heck of a lot quicker than responding from the office. So the idea was like, hey, if we see something happen, let them finish out, let them get out in the open, and then we'll try to do an arrest or a car stop. And at least we'll be in the area if something does happen. So we notified Metro and that we were running a surveillance that morning. And they said, nah, you know what, guys, sorry, we can't help you. We're running a 4 to midnight shift on some other robberies. We handle federal cases. They handle all cases. So, okay, man, we have a rash of 7-Eleven and Circle K robberies going on in Southwest. So we're actually staking out 7-Elevens and Circle K's from 4 to midnight. They were doing the same thing, except they were doing it to the convenience stores. So they said, hey, man, we can't help you. We're sorry. And that's what happened. So we met at 9 o'clock, got the briefing. Everybody was assigned to different teams. We were assigned to 4 major locations where these individuals had hit previously. At 136th Street and US 1, these guys had actually hit that bank twice. That takes a lot of balls to hit the same bank twice. It's like, holy cow, man, you got to be kidding me, you know. But in all fairness, they hit the bank once and then they hit an armored truck in front of the bank the second time. But still, though, it went back to the same well. That's how the surveillance originated, and that's how the surveillance was planned. We had a total of 14 agents and 10 cars assigned to surveil and patrol U.S. Highway 1, South Dixie Highway, between 120th Street and 184th Street. That's like a 5-mile area in north and south. So for us, it was just another day because we really had no solid information other than intuitive thinking. Hey, man, I got a bad feeling. It's to tell people, man, I've got a bad feeling.
A hunch is just a good cop's brain taking all that information in and tying it together. It's how many cases end up being solved, and a hunch put Ed and the rest of his team on that stakeout. We know the criminals are recklessly violent, and we know they're militarily trained. It's now April 11th, 1986, and the agents have just located their robbers. Now, throughout his 25-year career in the FBI, Ed was involved in hundreds of undercover investigations involving high-risk narcotics as well as criminal and national security investigations. But even as a seasoned agent, this was Ed's first deadly force encounter. And what was his first thought when he heard shots ring out?
Oh, shit. Honest to God, you wanted an answer, I gave you an answer.
While oh shit was his response, he shares a bit more context on the details leading up to the shootout.
When I think back on it, there was a kaleidoscope of emotions that were going through my mind. When Ben Grogan called on the radio and said, "Attention all units, we're behind a black Chevy two-door Florida tag NTJ891. There's two males in it." That's when I said, "Oh shit." I could not believe that those two guys were in that stolen car and they had not bothered to change the tag on the car, because that car had been stolen. The owner was shot and left for dead in the Everglades 4 weeks prior. That was our first living witness. That's who gave us the composite police sketch. He survived to tell his story, and that's how we got a bunch of information from him. So that car was on the news. There was a bolo all the way up to Minnesota looking for this car. And these guys didn't bother changing the tag. And I said, oh my God, these guys are absolutely stupid. Or maybe they're not stupid. They're like, hey, screw the cops. And as it turns out, I think it was the second. But then after that announcement came on the radio, everybody was vectoring in to where Ben Grogan was calling out his locations. So I was lucky in that I was able to catch up with them in about 2 or 3 minutes through heavy late rush hour traffic. Because you're trying to get up to, you really don't know where they are. You don't want to use your lights and sirens because that'll alert them. But I was a passenger. John Hanlon, my partner, was driving. So we got up there, and once he spotted him, I was like the eagle. I was the lookout. So we caught up with him pretty quickly. And in the end, it was 3 cars behind them and 5 agents. And then McNeil was 6 that ended up being involved in the car stop. Okay, so I figured, hey, 6 agents against 2 subjects. I thought that was pretty good odds. But wow, I was wrong.
The agents are following the suspect vehicle. There are 8 agents involved and equipped for a car stop. They've got their guys, Platt and Maddox. Odds are stacked in the agents' favor. It's 8 against 2. They've caught the suspects off guard. So how did 2 agents end up dead while several of their own wounded, including Ed himself? Well, the criminals were trained, equipped, and mentally prepared.
We were armed with everything that we were legally allowed to carry as law enforcement officers. Okay, which at that time, it was a 6-shot revolver and or shotguns. And the driver, Maddox, was driving. He was armed with a shotgun and a revolver, and the passenger, Platt, was armed with the Mini 14 assault rifle with 30-round magazines. So, man, I tell you what, that was an equalizer. 6-2 with his rifle, man. He cut it down to 1, or 1 for them and half for us.
This eventual shootout was the first time that really jumps to mind when we start talking about law enforcement encounters with criminals having military-grade weaponry. As Ed said, Platt and Maddox's weapons created a situation that turned the confrontation into a 1-to-1 combat. Imagine the surprise felt by those agents on the scene. Imagine the fear. Now, while Ed and fellow agents had that advantage, that element of surprise, it just wasn't enough. This shootout became more about weapons against weapons and tactics against tactics. It came down to the way we as law enforcement are trained.
We had a law enforcement training, and I'm not bad-mouthing law enforcement training. It's good training, and it's only improved over the last 30 years, 35 years. It's gotten better and better and better. But people forget that law enforcement training, and I remind cops and law enforcement officers at my lectures, they said, hey, what is the police philosophy when you take incoming fire from a car or from a house? And they look at me like, what are you talking about? What do we do as cops when we take fire? We take cover, call for backup, and maintain a perimeter. That's pretty much standard. Now, what do 101st Airborne or 82nd Airborne or Navy SEALs do when they encounter an adversary? Pressure fire and maneuver. They try to flank you, okay? And that's what I tell people. This is the first incident that I am aware of where the law enforcement philosophy and a military combat philosophy came in direct conflict, came in a head-to-head conflict. And the results of the shootout are what happened.
Platt and Maddox are not going to pull over. The agents see them loading their weapons. It's a quiet street. nearly deserted of bystanders. If they're going to stop these violent criminals, they need to do it now. The agents move in, using their vehicles to force the suspects off the roadway. Platt and Maddox crash into a small parking lot, and the agents' vehicles come to a stop as well, only feet away. Maddox fires at officers with a sawed-off shotgun. Then Platt opens up on the officers with a Ruger Mini 14 .223 caliber rifle, firing it so fast that many believed it was fully automatic. The agents were immediately pinned down and taking casualties fast. Now, while agents were down and being shot, Ed grabbed his shotgun and moved towards the cars when he was struck in the arm and the head by the .223 rifle. Now, his injuries were so severe it would take years to get back to active duty, and he would never regain full function of his arm. Platt used his training and equipment to lay down suppressive fire on the agents and maneuver towards their positions. He then murdered FBI agents Jerry Dove and Ben Grogan before getting into their vehicle and attempting to escape with his partner. Ed is suffering from severe shock and trauma from his injuries, but seeing his friends down and being killed motivated him to fight through his injuries and to put an end to the gunfight. Using only one arm, he emptied his shotgun into Platt and Maddox, and then pulled his service revolver and emptied it as well, putting an end to the gunfight.
I'm lucky. I was in the Marine Corps. Okay, I actually learned fire and maneuver. I did not very well during the shooting. I maneuvered on my back. By the way, I was shot twice, once in the arm. It just blew my arm apart. And then once in the left temple area. I was down, but I wasn't out. So I had enough time to assess and figure out or try to figure out what the heck was going on. So I actually maneuvered around the cars to see what the hell was going on the other side because I couldn't stand up. I was trying to stand up with the shotgun in my right arm. You know, it was for what it was worth. I couldn't stand up, so I crawled. And I actually maneuvered, and I can't say that I outflanked them, but I maneuvered around to a point where I could actually confront them directly because I from behind the cover, I couldn't see him. But again, the military training helped me plan and be motivated or try to move from one position to another position. So they did that the whole time. They kept maneuvering around, and they maneuvered around in a big circle. Suppressive fire, maneuver, flanking, suppressive fire, flank, until they shot everybody.
Ed shares he didn't come out of the shootout unscathed. After 10 months of intense recovery, he came back to the force on light duty, having to take a full 2.5 years before being fully reinstated. And as he shares, the day of events became a story he wasn't ready to tell for quite some time. It was traumatic, and its impact had a ripple effect across law enforcement everywhere. Now, getting the full picture of that fateful day is ultimately what helped Ed heal beyond his physical wounds.
What helped me a great deal, the firearms training unit decided to do a training video about the shooting incident. And of course, I knew exactly what I had done, and I knew a little bit of what everybody else had done. But up until that point, I didn't have the big picture, the whole picture. Nobody really has the whole picture because we've got 4 dead witnesses. We've got Ben Grogan that died, Agent Ben Grogan died, Agent Jerry Dove died, and the 2 bank robbers died. So there's 4 witnesses that leave a big hole in the story. But what the training unit did in an effort to prepare the training video was they got every last crime scene photo that was on file. They got all the reports, all the sworn statements from the agents, all the reports from the Metro-Dade PD, all the forensics reports and eyewitness reports, 911 calls, everything, okay? And I was so lucky in that I was there when that all happened, when that all came in, and I reviewed all the information. And as a result of that, I became like the expert witness, aside from Dave Rivers. I became the expert witness on the shooting. Plus, I have something Dave doesn't have, and that's the actual eyewitness participation of the shooting incident. So that helped me a great deal because there was still some gaps in my knowledge. I knew what my little piece of the pie was, but man, after I saw all the evidence and all the 911 calls and all the forensic report, man, I had a clear view of the whole pie. And what happened, looking at that information and talking about what the incident with my fellow agents, they flew up some guys from Miami to help with the video also. We talked it out, and that was very healing. We actually got to talk and cleared up some points, and it was very healthy for me to be able to do that. And once I saw all of that, I started understanding, and realization came to me. But I still suffered from PTSD. And I tell people, I said, I know I suffered from PTSD, not hardcore PTSD. After the shooting, it was hardcore. Everybody has PTSD, from a traumatic event, whether it's a car crash or whatever. But after a few months, the hardcore PTSD kind of tapers off and levels off. But I had PTSD. And it was self-induced, okay? And I talked to my wife, Liz, about this, and I kept asking two questions to myself. And those questions were this: could I have done something different to help save Ben and Jerry? Or could I have done something better to save Ben and Jerry? And I punished myself with those two questions for years. Okay. And I can't tell you the date, but I know it was 7 years after the event. But it was during the anniversary date of April 11th, 7 years after the fact. That would make it 1993, somewhere in there, 94. The anniversary came up, and I was going, reminiscing and remembering. Remembrance is part of the healing process. But I remember asking myself those two questions that I'd been asking myself for 7 years, and finally answered my own questions. I said, you know what? I think I did everything humanly possible to try to help and or save Ben and Jerry. And I think they know it. And if they have any issues or any problem with that, I think they would forgive me. I just had to forgive myself for whatever reason. But when I finally accepted the fact that I had done everything humanly possible, it was like magic. It was like, man, all I had to do was say, hey, it's okay. You did the best you could. And I think Ben and Jerry would agree with you. And it was poof. After that, it was like sunny days. Nothing. I had no more problems or issues with PTSD.
As we wrap the conversation around the events leading up to April 11th and the resulting impact of the militarization of law enforcement, I want to pull out some of the things we hear from police critics. We hear things like, if we didn't use military equipment, training, or tactics, then the bad guys wouldn't do anything. You heard Ed share how his military training may have saved his life. You heard how prepared and the due diligence he and his fellow agents took in overtaking the robbers. They simply had no chance to overcome them in a way that didn't result in lives lost. And having lived through the events, Ed shares his thoughts to those naysayers.
It's like law enforcement has always been behind the curve. Okay, law enforcement, bad guys, criminals are always ahead. They're the ones that are always going out and getting the newest toys, the best toys. They're the ones that are always either purchasing or stealing or whatever, heavier weapons, more advanced weapons. Because they don't have any rules and regulations. They could care. They couldn't give 2 pennies for anything. We're the ones that have to follow the rules. And if I had one thing to say is that sometimes law enforcement doesn't have enough firepower, as was our case, okay? Critics who say, hey, listen, if cops didn't have the militarization, it's like, hey, there'd be more dead cops. I think we'd have 25, 30, 40% more dead cops in the country than we do now. Because I know for a fact that the Bureau and other law enforcement agencies that I'm familiar with have been involved in violent confrontations. And the difference has been a heavy weapon, either an assault rifle or an assault shotgun of some type. It's one thing for a person who lives and basks in the shadow of and safety that's provided by warriors. It's one thing for them to criticize, but you know what, though? You don't see them putting their butts on the line to try to enforce the law, to keep the rule of law going for everybody. I mean, talk is cheap.
Ed paints a picture of the impact militarization of law enforcement has since made. He showcases the importance of strong police work, of serving the greater good, and the sacrifices that come inherent to his line of work. Ed retired from the FBI in 2004, but his law enforcement career didn't end there. In 2017, Ed wrote FBI Miami Firefight, 5 Minutes That Changed the Bureau. Now, this fascinating book details his experiences leading up to and during that fateful encounter we explored today. I highly recommend the book, which is linked in our show notes. Now, what are the lessons learned from the infamous shootout? First, let's take a quick pause to hear from our sponsor.
Help your team rise to increasing expectations with Agency 360's cloud-based software. Whether it is for the training of new employees or annual performance evaluations, Agency 360 can help trainers and supervisors streamline documentation, create consistency, and communicate clearly. Help retention by setting the tone and culture early with Agency 360. Learn more at agency360.com. That's AGENCY 360.com.
One of the many lessons learned from the 1986 FBI Miami shootout was that law enforcement needed to be prepared to deal with military equipment and tactics. Now, many anti-police advocates claim that the use of military equipment and tactics encourages and causes violence. They go on to say that if the police would forego these types of equipment, such as armored cars and rifles, and not encourage military-style training, then suspects would not violently resist. Now, that reasoning would assume that law enforcement escalated the situation and that violence didn't occur prior to the police arrival. Well, history and facts speak otherwise. Law enforcement is reactive by nature. We respond to crimes already in progress, and we are forced to change our tactics and equipment based on actions taken by the perpetrators. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and see how we got here. Hang on for today's history lesson. There is a significant and well-documented history of criminals utilizing military equipment and training, as well as military tactics to commit crimes. Law enforcement has simply responded to those situations. In the 1930s, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow used military weapons stolen from a National Guard armory in Oklahoma. One of Clyde's favorite weapons was the Browning automatic rifle, a true assault weapon designed for soldiers to use in battle while charging enemy trenches. Now, this weapon went on to be used in World War II as a squad automatic weapon to great effect. In the 1970s, a group of radicals calling themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, and whose leader even called himself General Field Marshal Sink, used World War II military equipment to commit a series of bank robberies and kidnappings. And in 1974, the SLA faced off against a brand new organization within the Los Angeles Police Department called SWAT. The Special Weapons and Tactics Team was designed to deal specifically with these type of militarily armed groups. In 1997, two men, dressed head to toe in bulletproof armor, walked into a Bank of America branch in the North Hollywood district of Los Angeles. They carried fully automatic rifles and the thousands of rounds of ammunition. They robbed the bank and then began firing their weapons indiscriminately into the surrounding community. Responding officers didn't have the necessary equipment to deal with the bank robbers, and several officers went into a nearby gun store and grabbed AR-style rifles off the shelves to try and combat the active shooters. Most departments are equipped with patrol rifles today because of this specific incident. And in 2016, protesters staged an event in Dallas, Texas in response to the police action shootings of black men in Louisiana and Minnesota. Dallas police officers were staged in the area to help with the crowd control during the protest. A man dressed in military-style clothing, who had prior military training and carrying a military-style rifle, ambushed officers working the protest. He killed 5 police officers before eventually being killed by police. So what are we left with? The militarization of law enforcement has been a hot-button topic for a while now. But we didn't start it. In response to the actions taken by criminals, law enforcement has had to add military-style equipment to its arsenal. We went from revolvers and shotguns to semi-automatic pistols and patrol rifles. We've had to add armored cars to protect responding police units from machine guns used by criminals. We've had to create specially trained units like SWAT to meet the bad guys' tactics. And we've had to train our officers to understand that there are evil people in this world who want to kill them and those they're charged to protect. Now, I hope I don't come across like I'm advocating for officers to wear full battle dress while foot patrolling the local county fair. That's ridiculous. Within law enforcement, just like every other profession, there is a time and a place for your equipment and tactics. And the critics who claim law enforcement should have no access to military equipment, weapons, or tactics flat out do not understand the challenges faced by law enforcement and the history of law enforcement. A good department must have access to the tools they need to get the job done. That means when the job calls for shorts and polo shirts and stickers for the kids, the department should roll that out. And when the job calls for highly trained tactical officers with the necessary equipment to bring a quick and safe resolution to a likely deadly force encounter, well, they'll have what they need available. Remember, we didn't start this, but we were hired to finish it. And that's the story we have to start telling. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm curious what questions you're getting asked. What isn't the news covering? What story needs to be told? Connect with me at bluecanarypodcast@gmail.com.